All right, guys, welcome back. We are going to hop right into another painting. This lesson is going to be all about palm leaves. We're going to learn how to get the color variation, the texture, the movement, all with your simple watercolor paints. So this is going to be a really fun one to jump into and just have fun with. You may even want to do this a couple of times with some different layouts and different colors and just have fun with it. So let's go ahead and start with materials. You're again going to use your watercolor paints. So whatever watercolor paints you have been loving, please use those. These ones are my favorites. A variety of paintbrush sizes would be great to have. And then we're going to need a pencil because we're going to sketch this out before we paint it. And then any sort of paper that you've liked using, I like to say mixed media paper, just something that's thicker that's not going to wrinkle with water. So I'm going to start with my pencil and I'm going to go ahead and start sketching. What you're going to notice is that I start with a long, thin line that sweeps sort of off to the side as the middle of my leaf. And then from there, I'm just building these big block shapes that have little breaks in them where the leaf would naturally have a little break. So if you want to copy this same design, feel free to pause the video just so that you have an idea of what that shape looks like. So here is a view sort of what that outline looks like, just to slow it down for you so you can see it. Feel free again to pause this just to get that rough sketch. I'm not drawing very dark, you guys. This is a very light sketch for me to follow with the watercolor paints. Now I'm going to go in and I'm going to do the same thing, but I'm going to have a second leaf kind of coming out from behind that other one. So I'm layering these together. So you're going to first see me start with that line that then will guide the rest of my palm leaf. So it's going behind the other one at the very top up there. Same thing, I'm just going to block out those shapes the same way I did the other one that's just going the opposite direction and very lightly just sketching it into place. Trying to make it as symmetrical as possible, which means having it the same on both sides because they tend to have the breaks in the leaves in similar places along both sides. So I'm trying to maintain that, but it does not need to be perfect. Please don't feel like you have to have a ruler out or anything like that. This is just a rough sketch. So I'm going to continue that off the page. And then I want to add some sort of details in there with some different kind of foliage. So maybe some like a thinner grass, something that's just going to fill in that empty space. So I'm going to use my pencil to sort of sweep in these lines underneath to create nice pointy blades of grass or longer foliage that's just going to fill in that empty space. Feel free to do the same. You can do it in different locations on your picture, but remember they're all growing out of the same ground lower part of your paper. So make sure that they're all kind of going in an upward motion to give the effect that they're all growing out of the ground. So now I'm going to move on to the paint part, and I'm going to just get a paintbrush, get nice and wet using some clean water, and I'm going to be creating sort of a bluish green color as my first color in this painting. And you're going to notice there's going to be a lot of different colors going on in here, different blues and greens, just to give it a nice cool feeling. But right now I want to create sort of a blue to get started. Adding a little bit of green as well, just to make sure that it's got that nice hint almost of a teal color to really give it a nice rich look. So I'm going to start on this first leaf that I created, and I want to create a very nice soft outline on that outer edge of that first section of that palm leaf. And I would recommend using a smaller brush, not too big, because we want this to be a very delicate line. And then we're going to use just water on that brush, and you're going to start pulling that paint down in a downward motion towards the middle of that leaf. And it's going to fade out, as you notice, because I'm just using the water. And then I'm going to go back and darken that outer edge one more time because I really want that outer edge to be the most prominent in all of the colors. I want it to be really nice and dark. So I'm going to go ahead and reapply. We're layering our colors like we always do with watercolor, and just apply that dark right along the edge. Then using another clean brush, I just want to make sure that I'm pulling that paint down in a downward motion towards the middle of that leaf. And this is just going to give it a nice blend. I don't want to pull it too far because I'm going to be adding other colors in there, but for that edge, I really want this to be a very dark defining line so that it gives your eye the feel that this is the edge of the leaf. Now I'm just going to use water to pull that paint down to the middle of the leaf, and eventually it's just going to blend right out into almost transparent. And this is just going to give it a nice base coat for the rest of the colors that we're going to add. All right, so now I'm going to do exactly what I just did on this top part of the leaf, which is a little bit of a different shape, but it's the same idea. I'm just giving it that nice dark edge first with that bluish turquoise color. And make sure again that you're using a nice thin brush, because that's going to be important to make sure that this is a nice delicate line. Okay, now using water, I'm going to do a little bit of the pulling down, blending just a little bit down to the middle of that leaf. Make sure you're cleaning your brush between. We don't want to put too much paint on the paper. We really want it to be transparent. Now I'm going to go back and sort of reapply the dark color right along the edge just to define it. And then using just water, and not too much water, just enough that it will spread the paint down to the middle of your leaf. Using a nice thin brush, what I found was that I could actually pull some of that paint down towards the middle of the leaf to make it almost look like the veins of that leaf. So I want you to notice that that's happening when I'm pulling the paint down with that skinny brush. You can get that effect really easily. Okay, now I'm going to move on to the next section and go ahead and do the exact same thing using that dark color right along the edge, making that outside edge very defined with a small brush. And then go ahead and start blending it again using the water. And remember, if you get too much paint on your leaf and you want to soak some of it up, just use a dry paper towel and dab it, and it will pull some of that paint up. This one for me was a little bit of a close call, so I needed to make sure I wasn't pulling too much of that paint down to the middle of the leaf. Just make sure that you're using a clean brush with water on it to make that blend. And then just keep going with each section of your leaf, continuing exactly the same technique that we've used on each one. All right, so now what I'm going to do is go back to the middle of the leaf, and this is another spot that we're going to want to define because we want that seam or the middle, oh my gosh, all you guys are probably going to know the name of it, but I just don't. The middle of your leaf needs to be defined just like the outside edge. So I'm going to go back with that same color and just add a little bit of paint. Not a lot, you guys, not a lot yet. We're layering these colors. And just add a little bit of a shadow almost of that color and then blend it out with a nice clean brush. And I do this a few times just to outline that center of the leaf and really create the shadow that it would create there. So don't rush it. Don't try to put too much paint on all at once, but do go back every once in a while and layer on some of that color. So I'm just going to continue at the bottom of my leaf now to finish up these last few sections. And you can do the same. So you're going to notice me jumping around because as things are drying, I'm going back and adding another layer of that same color just to make them stand out. Because as it dries, that paint tends to lighten. So once it's dry, I can see, okay, this is a section I need to go back to. So you'll notice in my painting while I'm doing this that I'm going to go back and revisit those sections. And you can do the same thing as yours is drying in sections that you think might need to be a little bit darker. So now I'm actually going to go ahead and mix up some yellow. I'm going to add a little bit of sort of a yellowish green color to really add dimension to this. And I'm adding it sort of to, in the beginning, I'm adding it to the bottom part of each palm leaf and then blending it out with water. You'll notice I'm not using very much pigment or paint at all. It's just to give it a little bit of a yellowish greenish hue. So in sections, I'm doing this as I feel like I want it to pop a little bit, maybe where a highlight might be. So feel free to do the same, copy where I'm doing this, and then blending it out with water so that it's not a big yellow blob in the middle of my leaf, but it's more of just a gradient of color on each of these palm leaf sections. So go ahead and do the same. Again, don't use too much paint. If you do, you can dab it off with a paper towel and blend it out with water nice and subtle. Make it look like it's all blending together. So there is really no rhyme or reason to why I'm putting this in any section. I'm just looking at the leaf and trying to decide where I want this yellow to pop. That middle of your leaf right now still should be fairly white because we haven't added much detail there. So make sure that you're not putting anything right in that middle section. Leave that fairly white for the time being. So go ahead and just start adding a little bit of yellow here and there and blending it out with water just to see what it does. It's gonna bring your palm leaf to life. It's gonna give it so much more dimension. I'm going to go ahead and let that leaf dry and then move on to my second leaf just to do the exact same thing that I did on the first one, because I want that to have a chance to dry too before I start adding details. You may have learned up to this point doing these projects that if you try to add nice, tiny, dark details on top of wet paint, it will bleed everywhere. It'll spread, and you don't want that. You want your details to be so nice and crisp. So it is important to let these dry before we go in and add the nice detail. So I'm going to go ahead and move on to the next leaf and do the same exact technique that we just did on the first one. So adding that edge, going back in with some water, and really blending it down to the middle of that leaf, dragging the paint down in stripe motion almost to create those nice palm veins that you see inside of a palm leaf. This one's going to go much faster for you because now you've got the technique down. So go ahead and work on yours. So just like we did on the last one, I'm going to go in with the yellow, nice and light, blend it with the water. Make sure that you're not doing too much paint. You really want to just use a little bit and then use that water to spread it. And again, it's just going to create that nice dimension in your palm leaf. I just love how this looks. It's such a great color combo. Something else that I wanted to mention too is you'll notice that a lot of times my brush strokes are in a nice, quick, sweeping motion out towards the edge of the palm leaf or directly down into the palm leaf in the direction that the leaf is in. This is going to create the effect of a leaf, really. If you're just doing circle painting or shapes or random blocks of color, that's not going to look quite as realistic as if you're doing those sweeping motions. So I did want to mention that too. I'm sure that you guys have picked up on that, but I did want to say it too, just in case you had missed that. So try that and see if that technique works for you as well. And then once that leaf is done and drying, again, we have not gone back to do the detail on the leaves. I'm going to take some time on the long, skinny blades of grass. And again, I'm using that same dark color as I used before. And I'm going in with a very skinny brush and just laying those in. If you notice, the top of that blade of grass that I just painted went right over the top of a wet palm leaf, you guys. Wet. So what happened? It bled. So please be careful when you're doing that, because now I have to go back and fix the top of this palm leaf because that paint just went everywhere. So make sure that you're not painting over wet paint. If you need to just let your painting dry for a little bit before you start your grass, just let it dry, then that's fine. Come back to it. You just don't want to have anything smear or bleed or spread. Now for the other side, I chose to use a little bit more of a yellowish green color to match and pull in that color that we created inside the palm leaves. So those are going to be a little bit lighter, and it just gives it some variation so it looks a little bit more realistic. You can see how skinny these paint brushes are because they're making these nice thin lines, nothing too big and bulky. So use the smallest brush that you have. It's easier to make them look wider. You can almost always make them look bigger, but you can never make them look smaller. You can't erase it. So make sure that you start with a small brush and really keep it skinny and then add to it if you want it to be a little bit thicker. But we want these to be very skinny to give it that opposite effect of what you created with those big palm leaves. It's a really great comparison between the two. It looks great. That first leaf is really dry now, so I'm going to use this dark color that I've been using for the leaves, for the grass, to go in and add the middle of my palm leaf, nice and skinny. You see how thin that line is? It's so small. You don't want it to be super dark. It's definitely not the focal point of these leaves. It's just going to give it some definition. So very skinny, very small, and then it fades out at the tip, almost to nothing. Using that same color, I'm just going around my palm leaf and adding some teeny little lines here and there, not everywhere, just every once in a while to give it some more of the shadowing effect and the more definition that we were starting to build up earlier. And it's not everywhere, it's just every once in a while draw little lines coming out from the middle of the leaf and then fade it out with water. We don't want it to be too detailed. We really want them to look more like shadows. And then I'm going to go back and reestablish some of these edges again because as they've dried, they've lightened up. So adding a little bit here and there is not going to hurt. And again, recognize those sweeping motions I'm doing with my brush just to give them motion. It really gives motion to your palm leaf and shows which direction it's been growing and how it's leaning and all of that stuff. It's a very simple way to show dimension and motion in your painting. The key to this painting and most watercolor painting is really the layering. So the more you can layer in that color, the better. You're just going to see how it transforms, and those darker spots are really going to start to pop. So as I'm jumping around and adding this dimension and the darkness and all the details, feel free to pause the video throughout so that you can then duplicate what I've done if you want. Or you can go ahead and just go for it. Either way is totally fine, but make sure that you don't rush it. Take your time. There's no reason that you have to finish this in one sitting or even in one watch of the video. If you need to watch this a couple times, that's perfect. Just take your time. Okay, so I now need to go back and fix the top of this leaf that I messed up earlier because I lost my edge when I painted over it with that blade of grass. So I'm going to go back and reestablish that with some darker color again and just really define it, making sure that none of it bleeds together. Okay, so now I'm going to go ahead and start going through sort of my last layer of detail. I'm just going on all of these little corners and adding my last coat of the dark paint just to give it that last pop of color. I really want these to stand out, and I'm not touching any of that lighter stuff. I just want to leave it as is. The white that shows through is perfect. The yellow is popping. I love it so much. Adding just a little bit of a dark line on each of these blades of grass is going to create just a little bit of dimension and detail. But really, guys, this is it. I mean, finish up with adding those darker layers in the same spots that you've been adding them, but otherwise, this is pretty much the end. I really want you guys to leave it simple and just accentuate those darker details that we've already established. And then that's it. This is such a fun painting. It's so simple. What a great painting to frame and hang up in your home, in your bathroom, in your kitchen, something like that. I have mine hanging up in my house and I get compliments all the time on it. So I can't wait to see what you guys create. This is a fun one, and I'm excited to see you guys post these in our group just to see what you guys came up with. I'm inspired to actually do this on a much larger scale at some point, so I'm hoping to at some point do that. But this was so much fun, and I can't wait to see what you guys came up with. There was some tricky stuff in this one, so I know you learned some things about layering color and establishing detail and not letting them bleed into each other like I did. So I know there were a lot of great lessons in this one that you can then take with you to the next one. Try this a couple times and share them in our group. I can't wait to see what you guys came up with. Nice work. And I will talk to you in our next one. Bye, guys.